The Seattle Seahawks offseason preview. They have a cap space of a little over $4 billion, and right now they fired Brian Schottenheimer as their OC. They hired Shade Waldron as a new OC, which is the Rams passing game coordinator, and that's important because of what they can potentially do in the offseason. In terms of roster cuts, I don't really see any because no player by cutting them is going to really free up a ton of cap. The only guy would be Carlos Dunlap. Cutting Carlos Dunlap would save the Seattle Seahawks $14 million. But when they traded for Dunlap, that defense took a turn for the better. So I wouldn't release him. I'd simply restructure his contract. After potential restructures, I think the Seahawks can have some cap space between $10 to $18 million. And this is going to be a realistic offseason. I'm not going to have all the star players go to the Seattle Seahawks. It's going to be a realistic offseason. So with a projected cap space of $10 to $20 million, they can do a couple things. Right now, they have 31 pending free agents, but these are the most notable ones. KJ Wright, Jacob Hollister, Benson Mayowa, Carlos Hyde, Quentin Dunbar, Ethan Pokic, David Moore, Shaq Griffin, Poona Ford, and Chris Carson. Out of these guys, I think they re-signed Poona Ford because he's a restricted free agent, and Jacob Hollister. I think KJ Wright goes. That's why they drafted Jordan Brooks. I think Benson Mayowa goes as well. He wasn't that great last season. Quentin Dunbar had an off year. Shaq Griffin is going to demand way too much money that the Seahawks can pay, and they're not going to be able to pay that. Chris Carson, too injury prone, and Ethan Pokic. I think there are better center options out there in free agency. So right now, the positions of need for the Seahawks are offensive line. We know that. Center, a guard, they need a tight end as well, a reliable one, a cornerback because Shaq Griffin is leaving, an edge rusher, and a number 3 wide receiver. The good news for the Seahawks is that there are some good options in free agency at center and guard. At center, Ted Karras is there, who I think is the upgrade, Austin Ryder, and Alex Mack. Ted Karras is good, but he's average. I think the prized possession is Alex Mack. At this stage in Alex Mack's career, I think he wants to win the Super Bowl, and he wants to be in a winning situation. Because of that, I think it's realistic to think that the Seahawks can sign Alex Mack this offseason. Then we look at guard, Joe Thuney, Lane Taylor, Austin Blythe, John Feliciano, Kelechi Osemele, and Brian Winters. Joe Thuney, while it would be nice to have him on the Seahawks, it is very unrealistic because he's going to demand a bunch of money. So I think they go a cheaper option here with Lane Taylor, Feliciano, Osemele, or Brian Winters. Then at tight end, you have Jonnu Smith, Tyler Kroft, Tyler Eifert, Gerald Everett, Jordan Reed, Richard Rodgers. The Seahawks want to pursue Jonnu Smith, but I think the cap number is way too unrealistic, so I don't think they get him. I think a realistic option is Gerald Everett. He was with the Rams. The passing game coordinator from the Rams is now the Seahawks OC. It just makes sense, and I think Gerald Everett is a really good tight end. He's a reliable tight end. I'm not too sure about his blocking, but in terms of receiving, he's a really good receiver at tight end. Then at cornerback, there are some veteran options that can go to the Seahawks and play on a cheaper contract because they want to win. Patrick Peterson, Richard Sherman, even though Richard Sherman is unrealistic because of the bad blood between them. AJ Boye, Jason McCourty, and Terrence Mitchell are some guys. And at edge rusher, Danico Autry, who had a pretty good season with the Colts this past season, who I think would be a good addition to the Seahawks defensive line. And Jordan Jenkins from the Jets. He's an outside linebacker. He'd fit perfect in the scheme, and he led the Jets in total sacks this past season, and for the past couple of seasons, for that fact, he's a pretty good player. And wide receiver 3, Josh Reynolds, coming from the Rams as well. So ultimately, in free agency, I think that the Seattle Seahawks sign Alex Mack, Lane Taylor, AJ Boye, Danico Autry, Josh Reynolds, and Jordan Jenkins. I think those are the guys that they have to target the most. And those are the guys that I think the Seahawks could sign and still be above their cap limit. Alex Mack and Lane Taylor are the top priorities just to fix up that offensive line. Russell Wilson has already, announced his frustration with getting hit too much. So right now, the priority is to protect Russell Wilson at all costs, no doubt about it. So they have to fix that offensive line. AJ Boye has been pretty bad for the past couple of seasons. Even I think he's capable of being a really good corner still. Because of that, the Seahawks can bring him in on a cheap deal. Danico Autry isn't going to command that much money. Josh Reynolds isn't either, and Jordan Jenkins won't as well. Then, when talking about the draft and who they should target, they don't have a first-round pick. They have the 56th pick in this draft, and they have a second-rounder, a fourth-rounder, a fifth-rounder, and a sixth-rounder. I think these are the three guys they should target that can possibly be available where they are picking. Quinn Miners, Trey Sermon, and Brevin Jordan. Quinn Miners is a center. He really showed out in the Senior Bowl. The Seahawks need a center, so that would be a perfect fit. But at the 56th pick, who knows if Quinn Miners is going to be there? They might have to settle for Landon Dickerson if he's even there, or Creed Humphrey. But then I look at other guys maybe in the fourth round, like Trey Sermon, who I think could be there. He fits the Seahawks running style, tough, going in between the tackles. I think Trey Sermon would be a perfect fit. And then Brevin Jordan. The Seahawks need a reliable tight end. And Brevin Jordan, if you watch Miami last season, he really flashed sometimes. And I think he's a really good tight end. He has all the physical tools to be one of the better tight ends in this draft class. So all in all, my potential depth chart for the Seattle Seahawks is on the offensive side of the football, Russell Wilson, Rashad Penny, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Josh Reynolds, Jacob Hollister or Brevin Jordan, Dwayne Brown, Lane Taylor, Alex Mack, Damian Lewis, and Brandon Shell remains at the right side of that offensive line at right tackle. See, I think this. Brandon Shell was not that good, right? But if he's your fourth best offensive lineman on the team, I think that's a pretty good line. Dwayne Brown, Damian Lewis, and Alex Mack, those are the three best. You got to sacrifice somewhere because you can't have a stacked offensive line across the board and stacked receivers and one of the best quarterbacks in the league. It's just not possible. You have to sacrifice somewhere, and I think Brandon Shell is going to be one of the worst players on that offensive line. But if he's your worst player on the offensive line, I don't think you're doing too bad. Now we look at defense. Carlos Dunlap, Poona Ford, Jerron Reed, Danico Autry, Jordan Brooks, Bobby Wagner, Jordan Jenkins, AJ Boye, DJ Reed, Trey Flowers, Quadre Diggs, and Jamal Adams. Last season, we saw this defense be one of the better defenses in the NFL down the stretch. Getting Danico Autry, getting Jordan Jenkins, getting AJ Boye, who has potential to be one of the better corners in the league, I think is really going to make a huge difference for the Seattle Seahawks. They cannot lose Carlos Dunlap. So whatever they do, you can't let go of Carlos Reed. You have to restructure his contract. Whatever you have to do it, but do not cut Carlos Dunlap. But of course, if you have Bobby Wagner, Jamal Adams, Dunlap, and all this talent on the defense side, it's really hard for it to be bad. The defense, I know there are some holes at edge rusher. They need an edge rusher, but this offseason for the Seahawks is about building that offensive line and giving Russell Wilson protection, because you don't want Russell Wilson to potentially want out from the Seattle Seahawks because he's not getting protected. You want to protect him at all costs. So this offseason is about getting Russell Wilson offensive line help, and that's why I think Alex Mack should be a top priority to sign in the offseason, or at least one of these top guys like Joe Thuney, Alex Mack, David Andrews, those guys, top priorities, and I think the Seahawks are going to get it done.